Start with the usual apologies for absence, Andrea.
We have apologies from Councillor Reid.
Just Councillor Reid, so we are quorate. Second item on the agenda, the minutes of the last meeting. Now, as usual, I don't propose to do a page turner of these because everybody's had a chance to read them over the last week. Just if anybody had any particular issues. No. So can we take these as a true record? Yes. Show of hands. Yes, thank you. That's agreed. Item number 3, disclosure of members' interests. As usual, unless already entered in the Council's register of members' interests, members are required, where a matter arises at a meeting which directly relates to disclosable pecuniary interest, as set out in Appendix B, Table 1 of the Code of Conduct, etc. The full details are in there. Do we have any disclosure of members' interests for this particular meeting? None recorded. Thank you. We move on to item number 4, which is the monitoring report and action log, which is a standing item which we have, which is number 4 in your paper pack. So we'll talk through this one, starting at, so this is the tabular report, reference number 1, external audit report. Councillor Oliver queried whether the revaluation reserve error in the NCC group account would impact on the corporation tax. This one, a verbal response was provided, and in the last meeting I think we asked if that response that had been provided on an email could be syndicated to everybody, and it has been now. So thank you for that, Jan, for sending that out. So we can close that one off. Thank you, Andrea. Number 2 was the Treasury Management Annual Report for financial year 21-22. Councillor Dale had a question regarding borrowing being clarified with Section 151 officer after the meeting, which I think, Councillor Dale, we can certainly say that was closed off now as well. Yeah,
okay.
And that's been syndicated.
It's back in September, actually.
Yeah, so we had that for the full meeting. That's the thing. So that's closed off as well. Item number 3, the Colour report. Regular updates on the progress made to address issues arising from the Colour report include the monitoring the action plan for the item to be placed on the work programme, report scheduled for the January 23 meeting on the progress made with the challenge board, and that is indeed item 5 on our agenda, so that is again closed off. Item 4, strategic transformation programme business case, to receive a report on the business case to ensure best value for money. For the item to be placed on the work programme, the Corporate Services and Economic Growth OSC would scrutinise the business case and suggested a discussion with the Chair and the Vice Chair, Councillor Towns and myself, to ensure that there's no duplication of workload. Now, we haven't had that discussion as yet, so we'll keep that one as live on the action plan. Item number 5, adult social care, to monitor any impacts from the item to be placed on the work programme. So that one I think is still live. We'll keep that one as live. Nothing's actually closed that off as yet. Number 6, a report on the processes and practices of employment and redundancy payments. Report will be presented to the November meeting. It was slightly delayed. We discussed that last November. The meeting has got this as item 10 in your paper pack, so that is on this meeting, so we can close that one off. It's been delivered. Item number 7 here, an update on the independent review of International. The further update report will be presented to the November meeting. I've spoken to the 151 officer, and John has assured me that this, because of legal considerations and a lot of fine detail that has to be worked through on this particular report, because it is, as you can understand, highly sensitive, and further legal advice is being sought. It's not quite ready as yet. So I think the reason for it not being here is perfectly legitimate. So that one will remain open until the next meeting. Hopefully we see that one fairly soon. Item 8, the Group Audit Committee to receive the KPMG progress summary from the Chair of Advanced Northumberland, and also we have the Chief Operating Officer, Robin Earle, so we have the Chair. So Kelly and Robin are here to present that, and that will be presented at the very end of this meeting, so we can close that one off as well. So that's quite positive. 5 out of 8 of those ongoing actions have been closed off in this meeting, so that's good news. So we have the work programme on the back there, which I'll not go through because it's a standard work programme, but it has a list of all the stuff that we're going to cover in this meeting, which is also going to be covered today, which I think we're doing quite well with this action plan, to be quite honest. I think we're actually starting to move this stuff through quite well. So unless anybody's got any particular issues or wants to bring anything to light about this, I think we'll move on to the next slide. Okay. So item number 5 on your agenda, which is the response to the Challenge Board Interim Report 1 for the Member Oversight Group. The report of Councillor Glenn Sanderson, the Leader of the Council, who I'm pleased to say is with us today. And I'll pass across, and also the Executive Director, Rick O'Farrell, who is with us today. I'm pleased to have you both here. So shall I pass across to you to take us forward, please?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for having me to the Audit Committee. The report is very much as it's written. It goes back to a year, almost 2 years ago now, when there were a number of matters that I had significant concerns around. And it felt to me that the only way that we could actually translate my concerns into meaningful conversation, it was to have an external review of governance. And I did spend a significant amount of time actually trying to get this review of governance, and in the end, as members will remember, we actually had to insist that it happened. And so it was the right thing to do, because it showed that my concerns were justified, that there were significant issues, some of which members are aware of, that needed to be discussed and dealt with. And so the Cala report highlighted those areas in some detail, the staffing issues were one area which have kind of been resolved now, and then there were other smaller matters, but still important, around how we do scrutiny, our corporate plan, and should we do a refresh, member training, and this whole issue around culture and how we respect or otherwise each other, how officers and members react and work with each other, and the Constitution, and issues around pace. Now, I'm very keen to make sure that we get on with this bit of work, because I invited the Challenge Board to come in as honest brokers to keep us right on what we were doing with the officer team that had been allocated to work on the action plan, which is in the forefront of what we're doing at the moment. I think the positives are that the member oversight group is attended by party leaders. We do reach consensus nearly all the time. We kind of veer off slightly when we hit some political stuff, but not too often. So I think generally we're working better. I think councillors, the way the council is running now is infinitely better, indescribably better now. And anyone who is looking at this or involved in that will know what I mean, and I'm sure would agree with me. There were some dark days, and I would just point out, if I may, just kind of slightly going off the subject, that I note that there is a KPMG report that's going to be looked at in pink paper, and I don't think I can stay for that. But it's remarkable that that was something on the 30th of September 2020, when I'd just become leader, that I requested an internal report into advance, and the email signed off by Kelly Angus on the 30th of September agreed the terms of reference, and so that report was done. I asked to see that report a number of times the following year and was denied access to it. So that's the kind of issue, when I talk about concerns that I had, that is the kind of issue. So I'm glad this is coming today, but I can say that this is the one that I commissioned and I haven't actually seen. So we are in a much better place, Mr. Chairman, now, much better place. I'm deeply indebted to our staff across the council for continuing to do great service and working together as a team. Rick and I have done a number of visits to different parts of the county to meet different sections of staff, and we do our regular question and answer sessions to staff as well. I'm really happy with the way the team is working and deeply indebted to the staff, particularly those ones who are helping us move forward on the action plan here. I will continue to ask for pace because it is something that is internal. I want to make sure that we move forward with this internal work so we can concentrate full-time on external work and working for our residents who are the key players in all of this.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, it is a very positive report, and the direction of travel which is coming across from this is excellent. And as I say, the council has made great strides to actually to move into a much calmer and more measured way of doing things over the last couple of years, and that is coming across in a big way. I'll open this up for any questions, and yes, Councillor, you have Councillor Jackson has a question.
Yeah, no, thanks for that report to the committee, Councillor Sanderson. You referenced a particular instance where you were denied the information that you requested, and that was as leader of the council. I think I've had quite a number of similar situations when I was leader of the council, and I know that a number of cabinet members have been denied information of similar kinds. Never mind the rest of the council. And that point's picked up in the Challenge Board interim report several times, and the final conclusion is that the council should arrive at agreed protocol on appropriate access to information for councillors, and that's absolutely right. The council has had an access to do information policy all the way through. It just hasn't been adhered to, and the rights of councillors right across the council, all 67, have actually not been properly upheld by this council. So I do wait in anticipation for the new protocol to come along to make it clearer that the councillors have the right to see absolutely everything that this council does, unless there's a proper reason for them not to, and that would have to be a very clear reason. I do remember the culture was different years ago, and I in particular used to get the council's accounts and get details of every single spending line that this council does. That's gradually been closed down over the years, and has been a real issue for the general governance of this council, and part of the real core reason why things can be hidden behind the council's smoke screens that they have been putting up. I don't say that's the case now, but it needs to be absolutely determined that that's the way things should be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Do you want to respond?
If I can quickly respond to that, that was then, we are in a different place now. And I would be very surprised if there are any issues going forward. If there are, I need to know about them. And similarly, if any member has a problem getting the correct response or access to a particular officer, that too is being looked at as part of this work, because we do know that in the past, and sometimes still, there are one or two areas within the council that we are not quick enough to respond to members or the members of the public, and that is something that we are working on as part of our strategic change programme. And all I can say, as long as I'm leader, I will do everything I can to make sure that we continue in this transparent and sensible way.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Oliver, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with the Chair that this is a very positive report, and the conclusions so far of the Challenge Board are the things that are progressing really well. And I agree with you that it's, I think, infinitely and an indescribably better place to be. But I guess one of the issues I've got, there's an issue about budgeting and producing budgets, and there's a sort of and also about the sort of corporate plan and how people are engaged with that. I think we need the point about pace, I think, is that we do need to make these changes as quickly as possible without the wheels coming off. And we also have a principle, you know, the sort of democratic principle that every 4 years an administration of some sort is elected, and they are responsible for running the council for the next 4 years. So great to include everybody and great to consult. But I don't. Is it really practical for us to sort of produce budgets as all 67 of us? Isn't that the responsibility of the administration to deliver something whilst consulting?
Okay.
May I?
Councillor.
It is a very reasonable question. In the past, I think the council has done a lot of consultation, talking to people, but not necessarily listening back. What we're trying to do this time is to ensure that we are very precise in who we are speaking to, and the fact that we actually listen. And you were at an event, for example, last night, where the genuine attempt is being made to engage with parish and town councils so they understand what we are trying to do, but we understand what we're not doing as well as they would like us to do. That all fits into a corporate plan and the way we run the council. So there were a number of issues over there. We come to the local area councils, and we talk to business leaders, and we've got another meeting with business leaders this week. I want to make sure that the corporate plan, and I should have said also that we had an all-member policy conference, which is a new method of engaging with all staff, and not talking to staff, but actually talking to members, but actually having a feedback and a conversation. And I'm pretty certain that I'm getting strong enough steer on enough things to be able to say, this is what we need to be doing more and better. And we will do that. It is the responsibility of the administration, but I do really like to talk to everyone that we feel is interested in this, and that's what we're doing. I haven't spoken to the Journal yet, but I'm not sure what advice they might tell me. Who knows? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just picking up on that, I mean, Councillor Oliver mentioned the pace of change, and that it is mentioned in the report. Is that I think they argue caution, don't go so fast that you don't take people with you. I think is a summary of what they're saying. Are you getting any sense that people are not getting on board with the pace of change, or what's your feeling on that?
Not yet. We are currently working with, for example, the Constitution Working Group to bring forward a new constitution for May, a new scrutiny methodology, and if necessary, some extra investment in it for May. We're working on our constitution being ready for May. So the deadline really for all of this is then. And if officers tell me that we're going too fast, then we will slow down. But they've kind of said, are you sure we're not going too fast? But they haven't said we are going too fast. And so at the moment, I'm just going along and hoping everybody's with me, and I think they are. We must get on with this because it's the external stuff that's important.
Absolutely. Councillor Dale, you had a quick question.
Thank you very much. Can I just look at the next steps, which are in the Challenge Board report, and just go into 4.3, because I think it would be something we would like to help with, or actually challenge when it's done. But the biggest thing is that obviously talking about pace. In 4.3, this is from the board. In the meantime, there are some issues we feel the council needs to quickly address. The biggest challenge is the longer-term need for change on culture, including the rebuilding of trust. We feel the best next step on this is for the council to produce a longer-term, 3-year, holistic overall improvement plan, which is clearly about what success would look like and how the current actions, and in brackets, any currently missing actions, would achieve this, especially around culture, behaviours, values, and ethos. And the board would want to work with the council to help develop this. So what I was going to ask, this is obviously very important, and they said earlier on that actually the challenge is bigger than some think. Some things have not been tackled, nor are there any clear terms, plans in terms how they will be approached. So I think if we went back to 4.3, if we could have a long-term plan, exactly where you think we're going to be in 3 years, rather than just adding on. And so we'd like to know which steps and how quickly they're going to be taken. Some will be short, like the Constitution. When that's done, that's done. How you enact the Constitution will be another step forward. But there's bigger pictures about delivering services, etc. And I think if we could see that plan and actually build in together to help, because we'll all see different areas where we think, well, that's too quickly or that's not correct, whatever. But that would be something good that can come back to the council. We as audit committee can have a look at it and address any shortfalls or add anything, whatever. And I think if we could have a timeline when you will do this report, it says in the challenge report it needs to be done quickly, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Anne.
Can I just answer that briefly, and then I'm going to ask
I was going to say the Chief Executive to take that one.
So yes, there is going to be a longer term plan that's being worked on by our staff, and of course we are in a period of significant change now because we have a new Chief Executive starting in a few days' time, and we are currently recruiting a new executive top team. Part of their role will be to create an improvement plan that will look at how we did things in the past and make sure that the behaviours are more appropriate going forward. I actually think, Councillor Dale, and I don't know whether you agree with me, but I think behaviours are changing. I think we have not had the kind of awful council meetings that we had a year, 2 years ago. I think we are significantly better, but that still means that there is room for improvement, of course there is, and that's why I'm pleased that there will be an improvement plan worked on that is separate to this, but it will be part of the council moving forward in due course. Rick.
Okay, I think can I ask Rick to follow up on that point, because I think he has a point to make there.
Yeah, I think that the leader has covered most of what I was going to say, Chair. I think I will just give the committee assurance that in that paragraph 4.3, there is action and activity being undertaken on all of those recommendations that the Challenge Board have made. And as the leader said, if we go back to the actual the work plan to address the issues in the Cala report, everything in that work plan will be completed by the AGM in May. All the various reports, the changes to advanced governance, all of that will be done. The only outstanding thing will be the long-term cultural change. We've got the HR team have been talking to members about a detailed cultural change programme, which affects how members, staff will relate to one another, how members will relate to members, how we will all relate to the public as well, the people that we're here to serve. And that is in hand, and as the leader said, that will be the responsibility of Helen, the new chief, and the new executive team to drive forward. So it is all in hand. We're not sitting back and saying we're going to avoid that bit. So I just want to give the committee that assurance.
Okay, thank you for that.
Can I just go back? Just to say, it is about an overall improvement plan, and they've put in especially those bits, but it isn't about an overall improvement plan. And we've got consultants who are now bringing forward all kinds of different changes, change plans, etc., etc. So I think it would be useful to have that all included, so we have one big picture about how the council's moving forward, and actually it says. What does it look like, and where do we want to be? And it's not that easy, because you've got so many strands coming in.
I mean, you've almost got a thing that could be headed the Northumberland County Council way. In other words, this is the way we do things.
Yes, Chair. I mean, I think this fundamentally, and having talked to the Chair of the Challenge Board about this in some length, there's the medium-term financial plan, our financial plan for 3 years. And despite the comments in here, Jan has a 3-year financial plan. There's the strategic change programme running in parallel with that, and then there's all the changes coming out of Cala. One of the first things that the new chief executive has done, and we were already starting this with Phil Hunter at the back, is how we pull all those 3 things together into a coherent plan that everybody can see. So that work is in hand. And we'll have something to bring to members once that's complete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, so I think what's important, though, is to accentuate the positive. This is a very different council now, and compared to a large number of other similar rural county councils, we are doing really well. All our frontline services, all our key services that we do, from education to looking after older people, are really good. For example, look at our education Ofsted results. We were in the lower quartile in 2017. We are in the upper quartile now. So, whilst I fully accept that it is the role of opposition to find challenge, and I always welcome challenge, it is important for the sake of everyone to just be clear how this council has improved so much and drastically over the last few months, but continued to provide all the frontline services which we're all so proud of. And that is why our staff, our advanced personnel, everyone that's involved with the council can feel much more confident now. No matter how hard there may be an effort to decry things that we're doing, we are absolutely committed to continuing this fantastic improvement, and we will continue to do so year in, year out.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I saw a hand up a minute ago. Was it Councillor Towns?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just add my voice to others who've said that things have improved. I mean, I've been commenting to other members about how, you know, the last county council meeting, how it was far less ill-tempered, and I think if people are in the public gallery watching that, or if it's on the YouTube channel watching that, I think that's what they want to see. They don't want to see councillors bickering. We have political differences, but at the end of the day, we're all here for, I hope, the right reasons, and that's to try and improve things for residents in this county. And I was pleased to see that I get the feeling that is back on track after a couple of years of where it was just really just a quagmire of political squabbling. On just looking at the paragraph that Councillor Dale's mentioned, 4.3, I see above 3.35 says that on the senior officer side, the whole team is interim in their current roles. They're clearly doing their best, but the uncertainty and lack of permanence is not conducive to them working as an effective team and taking a strong lead on the improvements needed. This will unlikely be resolved until after the new CEO joins in February and she starts to build a team. I mean, I often sound like a broken record on this committee. I've mentioned what I've described previously as a revolving door of senior officers and interim posts. Funnily enough, a senior officer said to me that was rubbish shortly before she left, and was replaced by an interim. But I would say, actually, I think the current interim team have done an absolutely brilliant job. I'll echo what's in this report. I think they've done a brilliant job in really difficult circumstances. But I'm still of the view, as with this report, the lack of permanence is not conducive to I wouldn't say it's to them working as an effective team. I think they do work as an effective team. I think it's being the most effective team. And I think we on this committee need to keep a close eye on how the new permanent chief executive, as she builds a permanent team around her, I hope there's a few familiar faces in there, but as she builds that team around her, we will keep a watchful eye on how that drives continued cultural change, because I think that is going to be absolutely key to seeing that, to seeing the kind of cultural change that we hope and we have an inkling is on the way. And that was just the point I wanted to make about that.
Okay,
thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And well, I'm going to ask particularly interim chief executive, because I think it's your last 2 weeks of in the job, to respond to that, if you wouldn't mind.
I'd like to thank Councillor Towns for his very kind words about my team, the interim team. They have been brilliant, and I'll pass your kind words on to them at our next team meeting. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I came here as an interim for 6 months. That was 3 years, 4 months ago. Came to do one job, and here I am sitting in the chief executive seat, which has been a great honour and a pleasure. And thank you, Leader. They've been a brilliant team, but you do need permanence. The Leader, myself, Councillor Dale, I don't think any of the obviously here have been involved. All this week we've been interviewing for the executive directors. So the chief executive starts on the 8th of February, so I have not long left. We've seen some really good candidates over the last couple of days. We've got more to see over the next 3 days. We have been able to already confirm who we would wish to see as in appointments. I'm confident, and I think the Leader is, on the quality of what we've got, that we will fill all those posts on a substantive basis. So that's 5 executive director posts plus the director of law and governance. Very confident we'll be able to fill that post as well. which will leave one further post to fill that we'll have to go out to advert, which is the Director of HR, which is a third tier post, what we call it. And then we will have a permanent team in place, as far as I can see, for the first time in 10 years in this authority, which I think is only a positive, and they are good people that will be employed. But thank you for your kind words, and make sure they're passed to the team, Council.
Okay, and thank you for that. Just to sort of officially from the point of the committee, I think I could say that I think we all echo the points that Councillor Town has made earlier on, is that despite this report saying that, on the senior officer side, the whole team is interim in the current role, and once they're clearly doing their best individually or collectively, I found that sort of slightly damning by faint praise, to be quite honest. Yeah. I've got to say personally, it almost looked saying that they're all trying very hard but not achieving. But as Councillor Sanderson has quite rightly pointed out, the Council has made great strides over the last 2 years with largely interim people in charge who are doing a very good job, I think, in a lot of respects. But, and that is the big but, permanence and long-term sustainable planning and working with the Council for a number of years and to come is the key thing to take this good work forward, I think. And I think that's the stage we're now moving to, so that's really good news. Unless we've got any more comments on this, I'd certainly like to express the thanks of the committee for this report, and thank you for attending to present it. Is there any more comments? No. Okay, well, thank you for that. Councillor Grimshaw, you have one last...
also make a comment that, you know, I mean, whoever's going to be in situ, and I've got no idea if the ladies that's on this call is those who are being interviewed, but if they're not, Hendrik, I would also like to express my sincere thank you, because they've been invaluable. The assistance, the help, any questions, any assistance, they've been spot on and on the ball. So I would just like to, whatever they're going to be doing in the future, just express my gratitude and wish them well in the future if they're not going to be part of the team. Thank you very, very much. Just to reiterate what Councillor Town said, because it's invaluable that they know that they've been an absolute asset to the team.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that comment. Very well said. Very well said. Thank you. Okay, well.
I've got two CVs.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, I think we can park that one. But thank you very much for bringing that to us. Now, Councillor Sanderson, you could stay for the rest of the meeting, should you wish. Oh, you've got another one. Oh, you're earning your corn today, aren't you? Yes. Right. Okay. Right. Well, we'll move on then to number 6. Item number 6 on your agenda, which is changes to the Code of Practice for Local Authorities Counting in the UK for 2022-23. And this one is from our 151 officer, Jan Willis, who's on our Zoom call at the minute. Jan.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Just a very brief introduction to this report. It is something that we bring to you every year, advising you of any changes to the Code of Practice for Local Authority Accounting, because that is the basis on which we prepare our accounts. So a couple of changes to the code this year. The one that I think will be of particular interest is with regard to infrastructure assets, because the committee will be well aware that that has been a tricky area for us in recent years. And I'm pleased to say that temporary relief in the form of a statutory override has been applied up to and including 24-25 financial year, so that we don't have to report the gross book value and accumulated depreciation for infrastructure assets, which due to some of the historic record keeping issues that we've had, particularly following the dissolution of the various district councils and the formation of the Northumberland County Council as a unitary in 2009, have been a major headache, both for us and for the external auditor. So I'm pretty sure that our colleagues at Mazars will be relieved as well that we have this breathing space in which we can get ourselves into a position where we're able to comply once that temporary relief expires. There are a few other changes which are set out in Appendix A. We can also voluntarily adopt the provisions of IFRS 16 in relation to accounting for leases, should we so wish to do. We're not required to, but we can if we wish. My understanding is that we are not currently proposing to do that, that we will obviously do that when that requirement becomes mandatory. So I will stop there, Chair, but happy to take any questions that members have.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. That was very clear, and it's also a bit of positive news as well. That's good to hear. I'll open it up the floor for any questions. No, general shaking of heads. I think it was a very clear and concise report. Thank you very much for that. So I'll move on, and it's you again, Jan. I think this one. Treasury Management Strategy Statement for the financial year 23-24. So over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I recently presented the half-year report on the implementation of the Treasury Management Strategy, and so I'm not going to repeat all of the things that I said at that point, because nothing has really changed very much in terms of the general economic outlook and the overall strategy that we're pursuing. So we are still expecting interest rates to gradually come down. We're already seeing some evidence of that as the markets stabilise. There are still some significant downside risks around inflation, some of the geopolitical things that are happening around the world at the moment, and also, government fiscal policy also plays into that. So the strategy that we will be pursuing over the forthcoming year is a continuation of what we're currently doing. We have significant cash balances. External borrowing rates are still higher than the interest that we can earn by investing those cash balances, and therefore an internal borrowing strategy makes sense. That will give us the breathing space while the markets stabilise further, and that will avoid us having to take out long-term external debt at the current high interest rates. So that's the overall strategy. There are some changes in terms of the SIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management that are set out in the report. So the first thing is that we are now required to categorise all of our investments and our investment income according to its purpose. So there is the usual day-to-day treasury management, which is about managing our cash flow and treasury risk management. Then we have service delivery investments, and that would include any loans that we provide to Advanced Northumberland and to Newcastle Airport and the North East LEP, and other third parties where that is for the purpose of fulfilling the council's primary functions. And then we have commercial returns, which are held primarily for financial return. And we do not have any investments in that commercial return category. There are other changes around a new liability benchmark indicator, which is something that we've already adopted in 22-23 on the basis of the draft proposal. So we will be doing that again going forwards. We don't have any long-term investments that might need to be classed as commercial investments, so that's not applicable to us. And the other change, a significant change, which I think is going to be relevant to us, and actually is something that is probably long overdue, is that we will in future be required to make quarterly reports to Cabinet, and what I will propose to do is to incorporate those into the quarterly financial monitoring reports to Council. We're not required to take that information to full Council, but of course taking that information to Cabinet will not preclude us from continuing to make the other reports that we all already take, both to this committee and to full Council. So it will be in addition, and hopefully increase transparency. And then just the final point there, that the code does touch on environmental, social and governance issues and how they should be addressed within our Treasury management policies and practices. There are no hard requirements, for example, to include scoring or other real-time information at the individual investment level at the moment, but that is an area that we are looking to develop and establish a more consistent approach to how we monitor those matters across our various investments. And I know that that is an issue that is close to the hearts of some of our members. So I will keep the committee updated on that as we make some further progress. I think those are the salient points I wanted to highlight, Chair. So I will stop at that point.
Okay, thank you, Jan. That was very clear. If I can just pick up a quick one just at the start of this before I open it up to the floor. So on point 10.4, training. The SIPA code requires the responsible officer to ensure that members with responsibility for Treasury management receive adequate training in Treasury management. This especially applies to members responsible for scrutiny. Members received training in June 22 and further training will be arranged as required. Obviously, training became a big issue because of the Cala report, and then it's something I noticed was picked up again by the Challenge Board. Training seems to be a bit of a hot topic around the authority at the minute. Are you fairly comfortable that the training is in the right area and is regular enough and is covering the areas that we need in this space?
Yes, with regard to Treasury management, we do refresh the training on a regular basis. I think there's always room for more training, and that's not just in relation to Treasury management, but also with respect to the wider responsibilities of this committee. And if I may, Chair, beg your indulgence and just give a plug for some of the wider audit committee training, which is coming up in February, I believe. I believe details of that training have been circulated to members of this committee, and I would encourage members to put their names forward for that training, if at all possible. But yes, I mean, I'm always open to the idea that if the demand is there from members, that we provide more training. But I think that is a matter for members to indicate what they how much training they actually think they want and need. Absolutely.
I mean, it's the old story of you can take a horse to water, isn't it? I mean, we have got the SIPA training, which is on February the 9th, and I'm signed up for that. And if anybody hasn't or has been thinking about signing up, I'm going to encourage everybody to sign up for this, because I think it should be a very valuable session. So the training is coming through, and it is looking like it's happening now. So that's good. So any questions? Councillor Daly had a question.
Yes, can I just make a point about page 43, Jan, at the top? Sorry, it's page 7 in the report, but it's page 43. In particular, section 31 requires the local authority to calculate its budget requirement for each financial year to include the revenue costs that flow from capital financing decisions. This means that the impact of increasing capital expenditure, such as interest charges associated with any new borrowing and any increases in running costs associated with any new borrowing. And I think that that's something I feel needs to be looked at carefully, and I would quite happily like a discussion on that within audit, because of the I think probably more on highways and LTP, which is Local Transport Plan, and actually the ongoing maintenance or value for money in the end. And I think there's a big question to be asked about whether there's actually enough revenue put aside to actually ensure that some of the work that's being done is ongoing and maintenance.
Okay,
So
John.
it's quite an important issue because it's actually we're talking about services on the ground on capital assets.
Absolutely. John, is that something that you could take offline, do you think?
We have a,
yes,
we have a conversation about that. I mean, it's a bit round.
Indeed, Councillor Dale and I have discussed this. That particular requirement actually, though, addresses a different point, which is the revenue costs, i.e. the costs of servicing the debt, which flows from capital financing decisions. And running costs from the capital projects is one aspect of that, but it's about both. So, in other words, if when you're incurring capital expenditure, you are also incurring future revenue commitments, that needs to be reflected. So Councillor Dale's quite right that the maintenance of assets and any costs associated with operating them does need to be captured, and that is something that we do need to get better at, because it's all very well, building a shiny new building or creating a new asset, but that that's not the end of the story. You then have to operate that asset and maintain it for the long run, and we do need to get much better about those long-term plans, but we also need to capture accurately the costs of servicing the relevant debt associated with the creation of that asset or the upgrading of that asset as well. So it's about both, and that is something that we will continue to look at, how we can do that better as part of our long-term financial plans.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Does that answer your question there, Councillor?
Can we pop it into the
action,
list at the beginning?
The list of action. We
Yes,
put that
please.
one down
And then
as...
it's something, because I think it's quite pertinent to
If you wouldn't mind, Andrea,
our
capturing
future
that
development.
as a question from Councillor Dale, and Jan is the responsible person who will take that forward, so as we have in the past with other ones. Thank you. Okay, well, unless there are any more questions for Jan on this one, we're recommended to consider the report and recommend that County Council approves the Treasury Management Strategy. Can we do that? A show of hands? Yes. Thank you. Carried, unanimous. We're also recommended that the County Council approves the prudential indicators in Appendix 4 for 4 years, 23-24 to 26-27. Can we do that? Thank you. Show of hands, yes. And members are recommended that the County Council approves the minimum revenue provision policy, which is Appendix 5 of this report for 23-24. Again, show of hands, yes, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for that, Jan. That's passed unanimously. So I think we can move on now to item 8 on our paper pack, which is again Jan. Thank goodness you turned up this morning. So we have here a statement of accounts for 22-23. So over to you, Jan.
Yeah, so a very short report, just inviting the committee to note the key dates in the final accounts process for the 22-23 financial year, and to approve the accounting policies, and to authorise me to keep those policies under review as necessary and report any changes to the audit committee. I'm sure members have had the opportunity to read the report. It's very straightforward, Chair, so I don't propose to go through the detail. But again, happy to take questions.
Absolutely. I think it's an item which comes every year, isn't it? And it's remarkably similar every time. So it's I think we've seen this one before. I personally don't have any questions on this. It's very clear and very to the point. unless anybody else has any issues with it. Okay, we'll move straight on to what we're asked to do then. We've been asked to note the key dates in the financial accounts process for 22-23, which we have, to approve the accounting policies to be used for the preparation of 22-23 statement of accounts. Can we see a show of hands? Do we approve them? Thank you. Can we authorise the interim Executive Director of Finance to review the accounting policies as necessary and report any changes to the Audit Committee? Can we see a show of hands on that? Thank you. So that's passed unanimously as well. So thank you for that one, Jan. Moving on. And surprisingly, it's Jan again. The annual government's... and this is... Jan, Jan, you'll be pleased to hear that Councillor Sanderson is going to take this one.
Very good.
So, okay, so this is the annual governance review and draft annual governance statement 21-22. So over to you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. When I say I'll do this report, I'm just going to basically say, here it is. The history leading up to where we are now, learning very serious lessons from the past, and knowing that we are in a much better place today. I would really appreciate any comments that members of the Audit Committee have on this, and take those forward. And if there are any questions of a difficult nature, I'll ask Jan to take those.
That sounds like a good way forward. Thank you for that. Okay, well, I'll open this one straight up to the floor. We've had a chance to read this report. It seems very clear. Anybody with any particular issues that we need to bring forward? Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, it's fine. We do get this every year. And I suppose the question is, how do we ensure that the council actually follows this annual government statement? And in particular, as an audit committee, we've got an interest in the 3 lines of defence on page 157. I think we've had instances in the past where there's been what's called management override of controls, where all 3 lines of defence seem to be ignored or swept aside for certain issues. So what's the consequence if we don't follow the 3 lines of defence, is my question.
One for Jan.
Okay, Councillor.
Thank you, Leader. So I think the first point to make, Councillor Jackson, is that the draft governance statement is published alongside the draft accounts, and it is actually audited by the external auditors to ensure that it's accurate and comprehensive, and any issues of concern, either where the statement itself is inaccurate or whether there are significant issues that are not addressed in the statement, would be brought to this committee's attention as part of external audits reporting process. I think you're right that in the past, in some respects, council policies and procedures have not been followed, and I think, you know, we are all familiar with the findings of the Cala review, which highlighted significant weaknesses in that regard, as well as some wider governance failings. The annual government statement is intended to provide assurance that those issues have already been or are being addressed. And what we are looking to this committee to do is to highlight any inaccuracies or omissions in the draft governance statement. But as I've said, it will be subject to external audit.
Okay, thank you, Jan. So obviously what we're talking about here is repercussions for not following these guidance and guidelines and policies, rather than the policies themselves. So I think Councillor Jackson, if I can sort of paraphrase what you're saying, is we have a policy, we have a guideline, but what happens when individuals circumvent it and take their own action, which is against this? And I suppose you've mentioned external audit have a view on this. I'm going to bring Jim Dafter, who's from Mazars, our external auditor, and just to have you got any comment on that, Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Obviously, as Jan said, we will be auditing this statement once approved by the committee. And we will be bringing any findings we have back in our completion report, which we intend to bring in March. From memory, I think both the 1920 and 2021 governance statement did change post-audit. So it is just to give the committee assurance that it is a thorough piece of work that is done.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Councillor Oliver, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think when we discussed this in the past, I've been very reluctant because of the issues that you've just talked about to sort of support this, but I think things are improving, and the processes are more likely to be followed now, much more likely. Just a quick point though on the next item we're considering. One of the recommendations is that that basically gives us assurance about approving the annual governance statement. And so it should have really been the other way around. We should have looked at that one first before we went on to... But on the basis of the pre-discussion we've had and on the basis of everything else that we're talking about in the Cala report and the Challenge Board, I am happy to support that. But, with this... And the other point I'd make is timeliness. So where there are overrides, as there have been, I think a point I would make is that often it takes literally years to actually deal with them. And I think as a local authority, we need to be much better about jumping on these things quickly and actually dealing with them quickly, because some of these things have been going on for 3 years and are only now being dealt with.
I think that is a valid point. Obviously, these things don't get... It's not like a sort of a speed camera approach. You don't get caught with a big flash as soon as you commit whatever the problem is. It does take time to filter these things through. But I think the key thing I take a little bit of comfort from is that they do get picked up on, and the 3 lines of defence that the council are working, because the fact that they are being picked up as a sign that they actually are, it is working, and maybe it's not in instant time, but it is still happening, I think, and I think that's the key thing. I'm not too sanguine about it, because you can't be in an audit committee capacity be too comfortable with anything, but at the same time I think the 3 lines of defence are actually operating at the council, to be quite honest. Councillor Dale, you have a question.
Can I just say thank you to everybody else's input. I think one of the big things is what I would like to know is, I know you're mentioning about controls being overridden. At what level were they overridden? I think is the important thing is to find out exactly where they were overridden. And also to say we all have as members a position and a responsibility on the second line of defence, as we are either committee or scrutiny functions. I haven't been on anything for 5 years, I'm back on now. But actually, there is a position whereby members do have the opportunity, whether it's through the audit committee or anybody, to actually test and see whether there are controls that have been overridden. And then you've also got the third area, which is obviously the external auditors, so the last line. But as the audit committee, we do get assurances and we get all the inspection reports. And it could be that we've got something coming up next, whereby we actually delve deeper into what is actually in, if it's no assurance or whatever, that we start asking real questions to see why that's happened, rather than just saying agree and say, well, things are moving on. We might want to know where the controls have fallen or whatever's happened, because it could be all kinds of things. And I think that's an important thing that we have as an audit committee, to have a look at details, so we can ensure that any controls that have been overridden are actually looked at, investigated and managed properly.
Absolutely. I think we'd all agree with that, Councillor Dale. I think looking, if I can use the phrase, looking under the bonnet to see what is actually there is quite an important part of this committee's remit, I think, and not just taking a superficial view. And I think obviously we will do that where necessary and when it occurs. So unless there are any more questions, I think this is one we have to approve. Was that Peter?
Chair, just before you do that, can I just come back on the point Councillor Oliver was making? Kevin, as the council's chief internal auditor, has given his opinion on the adequacy of our systems of internal control as part of his assurance statement for the 21-22 financial year. So the report that follows on this agenda, Councillor Oliver, is an update in relation to the progress of the 22-23 audit plan. What we're talking about here is the assurance statement for the 21-22 financial year. So I just wanted to just clarify that point.
Yeah, that's a good point that I didn't spot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jan. That's the point well made. Peter Topping, independent member.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I recognise that as a independent member, so I don't get a vote on this, but I do think that the audit committee should be satisfied with this statement, and it, I think, accurately reflects some of the challenges that the council has faced. I do think it's important for the audit committee every now and then to read the statement in the governance statement that sets out this committee's responsibilities, because they are quite central to some of the issues we've been dealing with. And I know in the past that we on the committee have been frustrated at, as Councillor Oliver said, the amount of time that it's taken to get reports in front of us. But there does seem to be a different approach now, and that is to be commended. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I think I certainly could agree with that. I think things are moving forward. We are. I mean, I've been here for 3 years now as an independent member and then also chair, and I have seen huge strides made in that period of time, and that's only in the past 3 years. So I think they're not perfect. We're not patting ourselves too much on the back, but things are moving, and the timeliness aspect has, to pick up Councillor Oliver's point, the timeliness aspect is important. We do need to try and get these things to happen as close to real time as we possibly can. That will never happen in reality, but as close as we possibly can, and I think that has improved quite a bit. So that's a point well made. So unless there's any more points on this one, we are asked to approve the draft annual governance statement as shown in Appendix A. Is that approved? Show of hands, please. Yes. Thank you. Agree the draft annual governance statement being published on the Council's website alongside the draft statement of accounts and reviewed by the Council's external auditors, Mazars, as part of the 21-22 audit. Can we have a show of hands on that as well, please? So that is agreed and finalised. Thank you very much, and thank you for that, Jan. Okay, we move on. This is item number 10 in your paper pack, and this is a report by the Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management on the review of exit packages. So over to Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as members of the committee will be aware, the Section 151 officer issued a report, a statutory report under Section 114 and 114A of the Local Government Finance Act 1988 in May of 2022. In part of that report related to unlawful expenditure in relation to the payment of an allowance to an employee of the County Council. As part of the recommendations, as part of that report, there was a specific aspect in terms of follow-up action with regard to internal audit undertaking some work to some specifically identified payments made to former officers. And that is what this report before committee today tries to summarise for you as an audit committee. I'm conscious that there is also a piece of work on the current year's internal audit plan, which we brought through committee in March of last year, relating to a wider review of systems and processes in place throughout the County Council. That work is ongoing and will be reported to you as a committee in the normal way that we always do. But in respect of the specific recommendations from the Section 151 officers report, this is a summary report to you on the outcomes of that work that we've undertaken. So what we've done is we have undertaken a series of work following Jan's report, and we've reported those findings through to Jan as a Section 151 officer in some detail. This report before you as a committee today is a summary of those findings to give you assurance as a committee that that work has been completed and a flavour of the system weaknesses and issues that we identified. It was important that this was a public white report. So the report has been prepared for committee on that basis, obviously being considered this morning. But with that in mind, it is solely written with the in mind the role of audit committee to look at the systems and the processes in place, rather than a drill down or an investigation, if you like, into specific cases. So it tries to give you assurance that those issues are being looked at in detail, and any subsequent action which is deemed necessary to take forward will take place through the appropriate channels, and I'm sure then audit committee will be updated in future meetings as necessary. This is to give you a flavour of what the findings were in terms of the systems and weaknesses that we identified from our work. So in the background section of the report, we just talk around the specific objectives of the piece of work that we were asked to undertake following on from the Section 114 report. So it was specifically any arrangement where a former post holder received a package in excess of £100,000 or a payment was made to a former statutory officer. And I just want to be very clear with the committee that that is the scope which this specific piece of work covered. We then listed the 3 bullets in the report which are the objectives of the work that we undertook. So was to firstly establish the relevant county council policies in place at the time of each exit payment, to assess whether those policies complied with relevant legislation, and then to assess whether the exit payments which took place were in accordance with those policies and the legislation. And that is the basis upon which the 3 sections of this report are then structured to try and answer those specific objectives. As I say, we have prepared some much more detailed reports, and this work is trying to summarise all of those in an anonymous format, as I've alluded to. So I appreciate sometimes it may not be the easiest report to read, but that is the way in which we've tried to structure the report and make it as clear to audit committee as we could. As we went through the work that we undertook, obviously it's an important distinction between those individuals who exited the organisation through a redundancy or voluntary redundancy situation, and those who didn't, who left through a mutually agreed arrangement, if you like, and that we make that distinction as we go through the report. So there were 8 former officers identified as part of the scope that we reviewed, 5 of whom left through a redundancy or voluntary redundancy situation, and 3 of whom who left through the mutually agreed method that I've talked about. We have then sort of a summary at the top of page 189 of the report. We summarise in a short way that we did identify some significant weaknesses in terms of the policies and procedures in place or not in place within the county council while these payments took place, primarily around a non-compliance with the requirements of the Localism Act 2011. Specifically, we had the definition of a chief officer within the county council's pay policy statements did not accord with the definition within the Localism Act. And also it is a specific requirement of the Localism Act that any payment in excess of £100,000 is reported through full council for approval. And we identified issues in relation to 5 such payments where we couldn't find any evidence of those being approved through full council. So a non-compliance with the Localism Act. There, we also have issues around clarity around redundancy or severance, and I think it's an important distinction that the county council's policies talked around a redundancy situation or a severance situation which was in relation to a redundancy. Now that was not the case with the 3 arrangements where they left through a mutual arrangement, hence there were no policies actually in place specifically to cover those instances. So in terms of the summary there, we, as I say, we've reported all of these findings through. It will then be, obviously, Jan as Section 151 officer in conjunction with the monitoring officer to determine what the implications or potential implications of that are, whether those payments are deemed as unlawful, and I know sort of that's still something which is in the process of being determined, and that's a decision for that statutory responsibility that Jan holds. And as we discussed in the previous meeting of the committee, should Jan decide that there is a disclosure almost actually needs to make, obviously that will then take the necessary actions, and as I say, we'll then come back to a future meeting of the committee once those statutory obligations have been fulfilled. What we can see, to give committee some assurance, is that we can see a number of measures that have already been taken in terms of trying to address some of these issues, so that committee gets assured that they will not continue to happen. The difference between sort of the severance and the redundancy, it's a very legalistic area. It is sort of quite a grey area in some respects in terms of differing legal opinions, which I'm not an expert. There has been some specific guidance, statutory guidance issued in May of last year, specifically relating to guidance for what's deemed special severance payments. A lot of the requirements of this new guidance would cover some of the principles that we found and the weaknesses that we identified. However, that was only published in May of 22, which obviously is after about all of the instances that we've examined. I think it also, and just a discussion we've had earlier this week, there are still some circumstances where it still may not be quite clear as to which process is to be followed. That's something which continues to be looked at, and relevant policies put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But we've also now seen the introduction of formal business cases being put in place for processes throughout the County Council. I can attest to that. I've seen them with my own eyes. Some of these things we haven't yet had the opportunity to evidence, and I can't report back to you to say they're in place. I'm advised they're in place. I have actually witnessed some of the business case templates myself, so I can sort of vouch or corroborate that statement. And obviously I have seen, as I'm sure members of the committee may also have seen, some specific reports going through Staff Appointments Committee, going through full council, where we are seeing the requirements of the Localism Act being addressed and being met in recent weeks and months. Chair, I won't propose to go through the remainder of the report in great detail, but as I've alluded to, what the report then tries to do is take each of the three objectives that I've outlined and just address each one in turn. I think that obviously the first objective on page 190 obviously talks around the fact that the difference between a redundancy or voluntary redundancy situation and the other arrangements that we identified, and the fact that there was the lack of a policy or agreed procedures for the latter. In terms of objective 2, it then deals, it's obviously very legalistic in its terminology, but we're talking around the requirements of the Localism Act and trying to take each of the requirements in turn to demonstrate how or perhaps how not those requirements were met or were addressed by policies in place. And recognising that the 2022-23 pay policy statement has been amended to reflect the requirements of the Localism Act, to try and put that right for the current year moving forward. And essentially talking through what I've outlined in terms of the findings earlier, Chair, around sort of the payments and the processes not having been followed properly in terms of the requirements of the Localism Act. In terms of objective 3, again, we split that into a voluntary redundancy situation and the non-redundancy situation. And again, just taking each of for the first section in terms of the redundancy, taking the requirements of the policy that was in place, each in turn, and addressing whether each of those relevant payments met or did not meet the requirements of that policy. And then for objective 3.2 on page 199, reflecting that there wasn't a policy in place to be followed, but taking the principles in turn that we would have expected to see demonstrated, and again just trying to document for the committee where or where not those principles, as opposed to requirements, were actually followed. As I said, Chair, we have issued sort of detailed reports with appropriate recommendations and so on, which will be in the process of being reviewed and considered and followed up accordingly. But happy to take any questions from the reporters and answer those as best I can, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Kevin. I've got to thank you for providing this report, because this is not an easy report, and I can see quite clearly that you have to tread a very, very careful line in providing this report, and you've been very clear of what your review was, the objectives of the review and what the basis it was for you to actually provide this report. As you said, to establish the relevant county council policies in place at the time of each exit payment within the group that you sampled. And I think that's the key thing, to assess whether the policies complied with relevant legislation and to assess whether exit payments made to former post holders were in accordance with these policies and relevant legislation. So you had a very tight and clear remit, and I think you stuck to it very clearly in this report. It's quite clear, though, that this report is probably opening up more questions because it doesn't cover the full picture of redundancy payments and severance payments across the authority. It looks at a selected sample of senior officers and people who are paid over £100,000. So in terms of answering the question, I think to use the word systemic, if there were some systemic issues at the council, which maybe would account for any issues we've seen in your report, do they actually also appear further down the pay grades, if you like? So you would expect a systemic problem to be right across the board for everybody who's been made a redundancy payment, because that systemic problem would be a fault that would be repeated throughout. And that is, I think, the first question, I think, and we have had this discussion before this meeting started in our pre-meeting. We can't answer it from this report, can we? But will you be able to answer it from your second report that you are preparing at the minute?
Thank you, Chair. I hope the answer to that is yes. So, as I outlined in the introduction, Chair, but I'm happy to elaborate and explain a little bit further. In March 2022, last year, we brought our audit plan to Audit Committee for agreement, following the period of normal consultation and risk assessment throughout the organisation. Within that audit plan, there was a specific piece of work which had been identified in terms of looking at the systems and procedures in place throughout the County Council for the arrangements relating to recruitment, employment and exiting the organisation. That piece of work and the identification of that piece of work preceded the Section 151 officer's statutory report in May, which came 2 months after that audit plan was agreed. So this report before committee today specifically relates to the outcomes of the Section 151 officers report. We also have a wider internal audit review, which was agreed on the plan in March last year, which is currently underway. So that piece of work is not focused on specific individuals or payments made to individuals, I beg your pardon, but is a wider review of the systems in place. So that piece of work, when that is concluded, will be reported through Audit Committee in the way that all of our completed audit assignments are, once that's finalised and issued, and we'll look at both the situation which has been in place regarding policies and procedures in place, but then form a view as to what the situation is now also to determine. So where we have in the report, we have details of some action which has been taken, that would pick up as far as we're able to, given the time lag for implementation, but to be able to give that assurance that, yes, we've been able to evidence some of those improvements, to give committee that wider assurance around the wider systems in place throughout the council. So I hope that answers the question and is the answer is yes, Chair.
Absolutely, and that I think that is a key part of the if I can say, the jigsaw. The picture isn't quite complete on this jigsaw yet, because we don't know whether any issues that you've identified here were just specifically within this cohort, this sample that you have taken, or whether they were repeated right across the council. And that is quite a key issue, I think, because as you have mentioned, the Section 151 officer will have to take a view as to how she proceeds with this. But you can only, I think, in my opinion, proceed if you think that this cohort was somehow special and was treated differently from everybody else, or whether this was a problem which was just repeated time and time again across the council, if that makes any sense. But we need that piece of the jigsaw. So if we can have that, that actually helps us to triangulate and see where we are actually as a whole with this, and instead of just within this little cohort we've got here. Now I'm going to open it up for questions, and Councillor Dale was first with the hand up. So thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin, for a very concise report. And it does go back to 2017, so it's quite a long, obviously there's a lot of work that's had to be taken to check and go through everything. We obviously have a list of people, for instance, the A to H, which are listed here. And as the Chair rightly said, actually, you know, there might be further work that needs doing. I will add on to that one by saying that, for instance, there's an executive director who left and is not included in here. And that goes back to 2018. So obviously you might need to take a broader look at anybody over a certain package who's actually not included, and looking at the staffing. I'm sure HR will be able to tell you, because actually I think probably we want a totally holistic approach to this, and that means adding on to the workload you've got now. But you've obviously, I mean, you've done exactly what you were asked to do. It's very concise. Obviously, it's around a lot of the constitutional work as well, which is a concern, because the Constitution is bound by our Code of Conduct and legislation, etc., etc. So what we need to do is to make sure that, and I think that the monitoring officer has got a very clear idea on and a grasp of the implications of the work that's needed to do. But certainly around employment. I've got other ones I can, emails I've said I would send you, whereby there was a failure in the Constitution, which I pointed out in 2018, which were never addressed. So there is quite a lot of work there. So I don't know how long it'll take before you get back with a whole picture, because I think we can take bits. This is just part A, and I think maybe we need to take a wider, when we get a wider approach, then we've got a better idea about where there have been failings and what they are. And also, it would be good to have an input from the monitoring officer as to say how the constitutional changes, as far as redundancy, all the various policies, never mind the Localism Act, are all actually ensured that they're enshrined. And if there has to be yearly payment changes, that's to do with the Localism Act. But there is a mechanism to ensure that happens.
Okay.
Because it looks to me that once a failure is a failure, it seems to have failed all the way through.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I mean, I think the big one there, Kevin, is when will the second part of this report, which is going to be looking at more systemic possible issues across a broader cohort, when will that be likely to be ready? I think that's one of the key things that probably is interesting to everybody.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll try and address all of those points as best I can. I think, obviously, in addition to the piece of work before committee this morning, I think, as Councillor have mentioned, this was a significant piece of work. The planned internal audit is also a significant piece of work, and we want to make sure that we get it done correctly and right. That's in train at the moment. Part of the finalisation of any report will be to issue that as a draft to the clients and make sure we've got it correct, do that sense check and make sure that it's correct. And I'd rather the report took a little bit longer to get done but was done right first time than try to say, well, we'll definitely have it done by, say, March and then almost rush it or anything like that. So please be assured that that piece of work is being done as quickly as possible. But I think it needs to be done right so that when it is brought before you as a committee and you do get that, I'm comfortable sitting here and I can stand behind all of that work. To kind of address some of Councillor Dill's specific points, yes, I am aware of other post holders who were not picked up by this piece of work. I think, again, I would just refer the committee back to the scope of this piece of work, which was quite very specific. But the wider piece of work that we're looking at, we already know the wider list of officers or former post holders who have exited the organisation who weren't covered by the scope of this review. That we've already got that, we know those people, and we're picking those up sort of separately as part of the wider piece of work that we're doing. So please be assured around that. And I think, as the leader has already mentioned in earlier agenda items and discussed with the committee, obviously there is this refresh of the Constitution, which I'm sure Suki knows only too well in terms of the refreshing of the Constitution, which is ongoing at the moment. This is obviously quite a significant piece of work ongoing at the moment. And I'm sure that as part of that work, some of the findings from this report, which the monitoring officer and Section 151 officer will will be considering and talking about, and obviously we've had discussions as well to kind of make sure that we're all sort of comfortable with the findings, will be picked up as part of that wider review of the Constitution, as part of the strands of putting those kind of governance building blocks back in place.
Can I just ask, just to finish, say thank you first of all, when we would expect the larger report, longer report, or more detailed report on a bigger scope? That was one thing, but also this thing about the redundancy policy and how that connects with the actual list of people, and whether it's the post holder or what type of redundancy, because I think that's very important about how you deal with redundancy.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Just want to take that one.
Thank you. And I think something something else, Chair, that I was going to talk about when we're talking about the word systemic. I think until we complete the wider piece of work, I can't give an evidenced view on that. What I can say, and I've written in this report, is that we have seen non-compliance with the Localism Act in terms of the pay policy statement, which is obviously a very high-level document within the organisation, and we found weaknesses with that. So whilst we haven't yet looked at that, you would then perhaps expect that to flow all the way through, not just the sample that we've looked at. I think what I can also say, as well as we've talked about, we had a redundancy policy and a severance policy within the County Council, but both of which specifically only refer to employees being made redundant. So whereas we have some people within this scope which fell under that policy, there will also be people who didn't fall within the scope who would fall under that policy. But we also have 3 individuals who did not fall under that policy. And it may well be that there are additional members of staff who also didn't fall under that policy as well. So I think in terms of systemic, we haven't concluded the work yet, but it was just to make that point that we have seen that sort of weakness at a significant level, Chair.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Kevin. I mean, we have got the monitoring officer on the line. Suki's on the line. I mean, I know we did touch on, and Anne has touched on changes to the Constitution, etc. Did you want to comment on that, Suki, when we got to you?
Hello, everybody. Only, Chair, if you wish for me to comment. I think Kevin's picked up the majority of the points, and all members know that the Constitution work is ongoing. With regard to Councillor Dale's specific points, the Constitution will reflect current legislation. There are gaps in the Constitution which we've recognised. As the year has gone on, members will recall that we have updated the pay policy. The reason why it doesn't have deputy chief officers, because at the time it was updated last year, we didn't have deputy chief officers, but we will actually, we are reviewing it again to ensure we cover the Localism Act. Terms and reference of Staffing and Appointments Committee have been updated as the year has gone on to reflect changes, to reflect what's been delegated from Council, and to reflect the Localism Act as well, and to reflect some of the issues that have been picked up in this report. And other employment matters relating to staffing matters have also been addressed during the year. So as Kevin has said, these have come out of the Section 114 report, but there have been things that we've been doing as we've been going along to put ratifying some of the processes and procedures that we haven't followed when it comes to our employment processes and procedures. And with regard to a whole system failing, that is something which the Audit Committee does have a remit to look at. And as Kevin has said, he will bring that back. There's one final thing I do want to make is that, the Constitution, although it will be updated to reflect legislation, it will be a living document, and we have to take on board that legislation changes as we go along, and the Constitution should reflect that. Just because it's not reflected in the Constitution doesn't mean that officers haven't been following the law. I really want to make that clear.
That is a very good point. Obviously, the Constitution it should be a living document, but in reality, there's always a lag effect, isn't there? There's always a time gap between it's being updated and actually reflecting. It doesn't necessarily mean the officers aren't doing the right thing, but that hopefully is what Kevin's further report will start to tease out for us when we get it, and that'll be very welcome to see that. Any more questions? Do I see any hands up? Councillor Jackson, you've got one.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, I'm down as asking for this information, and you're all very aware that I did ask for a much wider scope of a report. This is just a snapshot of a few payments above £100,000. And I think there is an awful lot more that needs to look at. And it's a bit of a shame it's taken this long for the council to actually get round to investigating these things, because they all refer to events from 3, 4, 5 years ago, and I'm not saying by any means that these things are happening now. But this report does point to a few things. It does point to the extent of some of these payments. And I think it's been documented that some of the redundancy and severance payments in this council, if you aggregate them in the accounts, have been some of the highest in the whole country in local government for a few years running, and those years covering these particular cases. So what it points to me is that it is systemic. So the Audit Committee is perfectly right to ask for further and more detailed information. There is a question about unlawfulness, and the report does point to the potential for that. And I would personally say that unlawfulness does veer into illegality. I think it's some of these payments were made for a reason. You know, one of them was in excess of £570,000 for a post that was actually not redundant. You know, there is a big question about what you call redundancy.
Yeah, I think, Councillor, I think these are questions I think the Section 151 officer, if I'm right, John, you will be following through on this, because I think we risk going, if we're not careful, right in the bottom line.
I won't say any more than that about any particular cases.
We're risking right in the bottom line of the report.
I think, if we're not careful. I do think in particular we need to have the full list of the whole payments below £100,000. £100,000 was actually chosen because that's the level that should have been reported to full council, and most of these were not reported to full council in any shape or form. The first that any councillor got to know about them is when they were published in the accounts, probably about a year and a half after they happened. It was too late to do anything about them. The mention has been made of the Keller report, and Max Keller in his report made mention of the very large and unusual number of compromise agreements called gagging clauses in common parlance that he found he hadn't seen anywhere else in local government. And those gagging clauses and compromise agreements were linked to quite a number of these exit packages, and I think it's right for this council to actually ask why.
I think, Councillor, if I may, I think we're sort of jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit, because I think you're right to have these concerns. I think you're definitely right. But in terms of this particular report, which is, let's be honest, this is what the committee has been asked to look at today, as I think we have a risk of, as I said before, writing in the bottom line before we get there. Now, I would like this, just if we could, with all due respect, stick to this particular report and where it's directing us.
Back to the report itself.
Wait for the further things to come through, which they will, I think, which we have been assured they will.
A big question that the report doesn't really answer is about the lack of transparency. Why were most of these very large payments not reported to anyone, in particular any council member at the time, including the leader and the cabinet?
Well, can I pick that one up then, because this is an issue obviously that is important, and I think it was Suki. Did you put your hand up there? I think this is one for Suki and the Section 151, so John Willis, because they are going to be taking this further forward at that kind of level. Kevin is probably not the right person to answer those kind of questions. So. Suki, if I can bring you in on that
large question,
yeah.
and I'd probably leave it at this with the final very large question, is that a number of these payments were to do with the redundancies or severance of statutory officers. And it's quite clear in law that they should actually be reported and approved by full council, and most of them weren't. And I'd like them listed, and I'd like to know why they weren't.
Okay, well, you raised, thank you, Councillor, you raised some important points there. As I say, I not being rude, but I think we're probably jumping our fences a little bit sooner, but you do raise some important points. But I think I would like the monitoring officer to just respond to these if we could.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Chair, Councillor Jackson has raised some points that are completely valid points and questions to be asked. However, there is an overlap between Audit Committee and Employment Appeals Committee and any staffing related matters. So why, when, how, what, the lack of transparency, who it was, that actually isn't the remit of this committee. This committee actually looks at assurances, it looks at system failures, it looks at the risks. Your remit is there, as Kevin has pointed out. You asked 3 things. Those 3 things have been done with regard to showing that there has been some failings in our processes, and they are being addressed. I think we need to be very careful in this committee with regard to the remit of this committee overlapping with the terms and functions of other committees that have been put in place to deal with such matters as Councillor Jackson has raised. So I just wanted to flag that up. And with regard to what is illegal or unlawful, these are words that shouldn't be bandied around, lightly, because they do have serious consequences. Whether this was an unlawful payment, the section 151 and the monitoring officer, me or the new one coming in, will need to have discussions and then take that to the appropriate committees and forums that have been set up, which unfortunately isn't this committee, other than to look at the assurances and making sure that our governance arrangements are in place. Okay. I don't know whether Jan wants to add anything.
Yeah, thank you, Sugi. Jan, did you want to just pick up on anything there?
No, just to reiterate, this report was commissioned for a very specific purpose. I agreed that it would be appropriate for a summary to be brought to this committee so that the committee could have assurance that these matters were being looked at, and where there had been failings that they were being addressed, but it was for a very specific purpose arising from my Section 114 report, and that was to answer the question: were there other potentially unlawful payments, and unlawful in the context of the Localism Act requirements, and the fact that we knew that our pay policy had been wrong and not compliant with the legislative requirements for a number of years. It was never intended that this piece of work would look more widely at controls, systems, processes around approval of exit packages of various kinds. And that is why this report focuses on a very limited number of cases, those over £100,000 and those involving former statutory officers, to inform me and the monitoring officer in our deliberations about whether there's any further requirement for us to exercise our statutory powers. I think Kevin has given a very lengthy explanation about the further piece of work that is being undertaken, and if there are any further individual payments of concern that are highlighted as part of that wider piece of work, then that is something that Suki and I will clearly look at. But I just want to make the point that this report was commissioned not for the assurance of this committee, but it predominantly, or its primary purpose, was to enable Suki and I to ensure that we were fully discharging our statutory responsibilities. Clearly there's an overlap, but they're not the same things. And I do think your comments about not rushing to judgment about potentially unlawful expenditure are very well made, Chair, because that is a matter for me and for Suki personally, not for this committee. The responsibility to do that does rest with us as statutory officers.
Okay, thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you, and you've been very clear on that, and your thoughts on that actually completely tally with my understanding of this. As a committee, we are looking at the systemic issues and control weaknesses, and I'm very clear that that is where our remit starts and finishes, to be quite honest. What happens after that and where this goes and where this gets addressed is under the council's constitution. It is not necessarily this place. It's better in another place, if you like. But we have a very strong interest in the systemic and the control and process failures. And Kevin has absolutely nailed those in this report. Has done exactly, I think, what was requested of him. But it is not the full picture that probably everybody would like to understand and see. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this committee has to take this forward. If you see what I'm saying, we have a strong interest in this, but we aren't necessarily the place to take the full picture forward. But we are looking to that second report from Kevin to really put some sort of flesh on the bones of what we already have here. Now I have Councillor Dale's hand up again.
I just wanted to come back with what was said, and thank you, Suki, and thank you, Jan. Just to say that we do get the statement of accounts. As the councillors, as the audit committee, we receive the statement of accounts, and we're able to look at those. And the statement of accounts goes to the audit committee, the whole parachute, that thing. And actually, all these payments, not all of them, but some of them are actually in the accounts. So they are in 18 and 19 and 1920. And they're there. So if they're in 18, 19, you actually would have thought that's our job. I wasn't on audit then. That's our job, to actually have a look. And if we think there's something there, then we should have raised it, because we're the sort of second line of control as a committee, or the audit. That's one of our work, to look at the insurance. So I think we have, rather than just flicking through the statement of accounts, which I don't do, I find it very hard work, but I don't do it, is actually to actually go back. And I did go back to the officers who I saw at County Hall to go through problems I had. And that is part of our job. And we're all given that opportunity to go and discuss the statement of accounts, and always have been, with the relevant officers. And I think that's an important thing we must remember.
Absolutely, absolutely, Councillor Dale. And I know you personally are very keen to actually follow up in quite minute detail the accounts and look into under the bonnet, as a phrase I used earlier on, look under the bonnet of all the papers that come to us. So thank you for that. But Councillor Sanderson, you think you wanted to...
Thank you very much for allowing me to say something on this. I am deeply troubled by the report and the implications of it. And as leader, I have some strong views on the fact that I was excluded from a lot of this. So what I have asked for formally is a meeting of the Employment Appeals Committee so that the report can be done in full detail, perhaps if necessary and confidential, so that we can look at this and, where necessary, take action. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor. That is good to hear. Councillor Oliver, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you. I did try to triangulate this report with the published accounts, and we are talking about millions of pounds of public money, and it's worth making that point at the outset. I think the notwithstanding all of the discussions around the purpose of the report, what the report actually tells us is that there were some fairly significant failures. So, firstly, the pay policy of the council failed to be kept up to date with the Localism Act. Worse than that, it actually originally was up to date with the Localism Act. It did reflect the requirements of the Localism Act, and then a section was removed. Now, I would be curious to understand why that was removed, because the section that was removed was about transparency. It was about reporting requirements, and that was taken out. It's now back in, quite correctly, but I'd be asking the question, was that removed deliberately? Because some of the things that were deliberately not reported in the accounts that should have been, and so that members weren't aware of the fact that the reporting requirements were not being upheld. So I understand this is not a question about this report particularly is not a question about blame or even accountability, But as a cabinet member throughout much of this period, I raised personally, and other cabinet members did as well, some concerns about some of these issues. So we had officers disappearing and we weren't told that they were being paid off. In one case, a statutory officer was told, we were told that he wanted to leave. A settlement was reached with him. We later found out. And I'm sorry, Suki's going to tell me not to discuss individual cases.
I think,
can I just talk about broad principles? Okay, but what I'm saying is, is that we asked for information. We were refused that information, and I've got, I can demonstrate that quite clearly, where I've written to the chief exec and other directors asking for information, and I can show the responses saying no, you can't have that information. Okay. I was the cabinet member at the time, and so I guess the point I'm making is that accountability is important. We talked earlier in the earlier report about culture change, and that culture change will only happen if people understand that the behaviours that have happened in the past are no longer acceptable. So we do need some accountability. So it was good to hear the leader talk about this Employment Appeals Committee, which I wasn't aware of. But there are some significant questions that need to be asked. We also need to ask the timing of one of those payments. Was just before the government introduced a cap on public exit payments, and that,
Councillor, Councillor, I think you're privy to quite a bit of personal knowledge in this area, obviously through your previous roles, but I don't think it's necessary in this committee, or even appropriate in this committee, to necessarily go over those anecdotal things that you personally know from your past employment there, because I think this will come out through the further processes which we're going to go through. I think what I want to keep this to, if we can, for this committee, is stick to the process and the procedures that we've agreed here, and take it step by step. Because if we start to get into, well, I personally know this, or she said this to me, he said that to me, we're starting to drift quite a way away from our remit as a committee.
So can I ask one important question? Do the statutory officers have the information from this report? Because we talked in the pre-meeting about the way the report was quite rightly structured to protect confidentiality. But do they have the sort of narrative information that they need to decide whether or not any further action is required? We've talked about 114 notice, potentially issuing further 114 notices. Presumably that information, there's been an investigation, and do those two officers have the information they need to be able to make those decisions and make those recommendations?
That I think is a valid question, because you asked a clear and valid question. However, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to be rude, but I think if we start going through personal anecdotal information, we're on thin ice, I think, when we start doing things like that in a committee of this sort. So that can be saved for further areas. But I suppose it does raise the question, there's one for Jan and Suki, do you feel that you have the right channels of communication to get under the bonnet, and I keep using that phrase, but I'm using it again, under the bonnet of all of this, because people who have got that personal information from history may be of use to you when you take your decisions. Do you feel that you have those channels of communication?
Okay, Chair, if I might answer in the first instance, and then I'll hand over to Suki. Last week, I received the files containing all of the underlying evidence that internal audit had collected in relation to each of these cases. Suki and I have not yet had an opportunity to review those files, but that would be my intention, and for us to then take a view or take advice from the KC on the issues that in each case need to be considered in relation to lawfulness or unlawfulness. So I think we have what we need for now. And we just need to be given a bit of time and space to work through those files and take that advice, and then we will come to a conclusion on each of those cases.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Suki, have you got any further comments?
No, Chair, Jan's just summed that up. I haven't seen any of the papers yet, but I know that Jan has been keeping a close watch on this with regular conversations. I've just got back from leave, and Jan and I are due to meet this afternoon, and we can think about how we're going to approach this. But Chair, what I really did want to say was manage some expectations here, is that the leader has gone now, but he talked about commissioning, holding and convening an Employment Appeals Committee, which is the correct forum if there was going to be any employment-related issues. However, that's not necessarily the case. It may be that it doesn't go to any matter, it doesn't go to an employment committee. So I just want members to be aware of that. The leader may have called for one, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be one. Jan and I need to sit down, go through it and see whether our statutory powers have been invoked, as Jan mentioned earlier, and if they haven't, what other actions the council needs to take, which may be employment action, which may be some action with regard to our systems relating to governance processes and procedures. So it's not, at the moment, we are being premature in trying to think that there will be some action or not action taken. We just need some time to work through it.
Okay, thank you, Suki. And I think you both made an important point there. Is that this will take a little bit of time to work through. And as people have said before, we need to do this properly. We're not going to rush to judgment on this, and we're not going to rush the process. I personally feel the process is in train. I think the wheels are now turning, and I think we will see a robust conclusion to this in the fullness of time. Unless anybody has any further questions on this. One for Councillor Jackson.
Just quickly, I mean, you kept on reiterating that that this audit committee has a very limited remit, and all we can look into is controls and systems. Well, actually, I do want you to look into the controls and systems, because what if the controls and systems go wrong? What's the consequence then? And it's something that Mr. Topping and I were talking about in relation to the general governance of the whole council. What happens next is basically the question, and we'll come back to that at a future meeting with any luck.
I'm sure that is going to be at the forefront of everybody's minds in the future when further information comes out about this. Not presupposing what information might come out, but we do need to think about how do we take this forward. And I think you touched on this in your introduction, Kevin, didn't you, about the processes which have to be adhered to, and Jan is going to look at any particular legal aspects of this which need to be considered as well. So I think between the processes and the systems which Kevin will be looking at, and between the legal aspects and whether there has been anything unlawful which Jan and Suki will be looking at, I think we've covered the bases. And I think this committee needs to be just to take note of this and to keep a watching brief on what's happening here. But it isn't necessarily our job to get under the bonnet. I've said it again, probably the fourth time today. Too far with this, because people are doing it, and it is being doing, in my opinion, it's been done in the right places. It's been done in the right places. The right people are doing the job in the right time and the right places, and I think that's the key thing. And I think as an audit committee, we need to know that that's happening, and I feel that it is happening. But that's not to say we should be too sanguine about the outcomes of all of this, but we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. But I think the right people are on the job and are doing the right things at the right time, and I think that's the key thing we need to take away from this today. So unless there's any more on this particular one, it is a very, very important report, and it is a difficult report. I'm sure I'd thank Kevin very much and his team for providing this, and I know it's only the start of a journey really in some respects, but thank you for providing that. So if we're happy, we can move on from that at this stage. Obviously this is going to take us just part of the journey, but we'll come back to it in future meetings. Okay, moving on. Item 11 on the agenda, which is the preparation of the Strategic Audit Plan 23-24, and again it's Kevin to present this one.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I hope this is a more straightforward report for the committee. This is a report which we bring to committee in January each year. As I've already mentioned, and the committee are aware, we prepare our audit plan each year and bring that to audit committee for agreement in March each year, and we'll be doing that at the next meeting in March. The report before committee this morning just outlines the approach that we will be taking between now and March before we bring that report back to you for agreement, and just talks through the stages which we will be undertaking to give you as a committee some assurance about the processes that we'll be going through, and also to seek any errors from you as an audit committee as a major stakeholder of our work, of any areas which you would like to suggest for inclusion within the audit plan, which we will bring to March as meeting for 2023-24. Chair, I won't say anything further, but happy for any questions, Chair.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Kevin. I think it's fairly standard report, as you say. Certainly compared to the last report, remarkably straightforward and uncontroversial. Any questions? No? Okay. Right, well, we are asked to consider and endorse the approach to the preparation of the 23-24 strategic audit plan. Can we endorse it? Show of hands, please. Yes, we can. Thank you very much. I think we don't need to linger too long on that one, Kevin. Thank you for providing that. And this, I think, is your last one for today, Kevin. This is Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, a report by the Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is not a standard report which we bring to Audit Committee, but members of the committee will be aware we often mention the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards. These are a raft of requirements with which myself and the work of the team is required to, we have to comply with those requirements. One of the requirements of the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards is that we have an external assessment at least once every 5 years. The previous external assessment that we had of our then shared Internal Audit and Risk Management Service was in February 2018. So we are now due another external assessment. So what the report before committee this morning does is just explain those requirements to committee, explain the proposal that we have in terms of undertaking that review. There are a number of options available in terms of how an internal audit service may wish to be assessed. We are proposing a truly external assessment through an external body who is a leading local government governance organisation. We haven't named them. Actually, no. Yes, we have. I beg your pardon. Which by using assessors from CIPFA, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, and we have undertaken a self-assessment of the requirements of I think there's 324 specific questions as part of a self-assessment, Chair. So the assessment would take the basis of an evidenced assessment of our self-assessment. So we've just, as an appendix to the report, provided Audit Committee with a summary of that self-assessment, which will be provided to the external assessor. It indicates, as I hope you would expect, a high level of compliance. There are areas which we've identified as being partially compliant, and there's one minor aspect in terms of something that we would include in my annual report each year, which would just need to add in to make sure that we have full compliance on that. But we've identified actions to address all of that. But as I said, the report kind of provides that summary to Audit Committee, identifying those areas which we would have identified there. And one of the areas which we just want to strengthen and codify arrangements relates to a quality assurance and improvement programme. And obviously that document is attached for Audit Committee's attention as Appendix B, and just sort of shows that the procedures that we have in place and will have in place in terms of how we address those requirements and make those requirements a bit more visible to you as an Audit Committee. I think building on some of the arrangements as a committee that we've had building over the last sort of period of time, just strengthening those even further, making that completely transparent and clear to you as an Audit Committee around those arrangements, Chair. I don't propose to go through any more, Chair, but the committee are probably pleased to hear, but happy to take any questions from members.
Okay, thank you for that, Kevin. That's very clear. I noticed that there are 324 individual questions in the checklist. Well, I've got to thank you for not including them all in this today, but would they be available if committee members wanted to see them and see the outcomes?
Absolutely, Chair. I think I might say careful what you wish for, but absolutely. And we just, you know, again, trying to make it not hiding information from committee, but obviously we did the summary rather than providing sort of half a yellow pages worth of kind of documentation. But that's why we took the approach we did. I think one additional comment that I would make, Chair, is just reflecting that the timing of the assessment, I think, is a little unfortunate in terms of a personal view, given that we left a shared service hosted by another organisation less than 12 months ago. So I think I'm fully expecting some recommendations to come out of the report. I'm going to be very transparent with the committee around that. I'm comfortable in terms of the work that we do and how we do it, but it's reflecting that we've only had 10 months to put a lot of arrangements back into place, and we're still working through that. So what I would hate to do is leave the committee with a view that absolutely everything is perfect, and then the report comes from the external assessor giving a load of kind of findings or recommendations, and it's just kind of getting that balance between how we're doing it and how we make sure we can demonstrate that we're doing it, which I know we've talked about in committee before.
Absolutely. No, that's a point well made, and I think we do need to think about that. You're still work in progress. This is just 10 months, isn't it? So it's not a long time. So thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Daly, you've got a question.
I was going to say, I think I have to say thank you, because you've actually had a tremendous amount of work on your plate as the internal auditors, and actually adding on this as well, and having to take in what went before as well, and trying to strangulate into one. Anyway, I'm sure you'll do very well. But anyway, thank you for all the work you've done.
Yeah, we can certainly echo that. Thank you for that, Kevin. There's never a good time to be audited, is there? As I'm sure a lot of your customers tell you. But yes, so good stuff. Any questions on this particular? I think it's a fairly straightforward piece of work. We look forward to seeing the outcomes of this. We are asked in this one to agree the Quality Assurance Improvement Programme, which is attached as Appendix B, which is a requirement of the public sector internal audit standards. Can we agree that? Show of hands, yes, thank you. And also on point F there, agree that the outcomes from the external assessment will be reported to a future meeting of the Audit Committee once the external assessment has been completed. We can agree that, I'm sure, yes. Oh, we've got an agree, yes, we've got another one. Failure of my highlighting pen, I missed an agree. Right, and we've also got, note that it is a requirement that the internal audit service will be externally assessed at least once every 5 years, and agree that Northumberland County Council's external assessment will be performed before the end of March 23 by SIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. So can we agree that one as well? Thank you very much. So all agreed. Thank you very much, Kevin. Now, I think we are now going to move into the in-camera part of the meeting. We'll just have to close down the housekeeping issues. Oh, we've got Jim. Sorry, Jim. I can only apologise, because you've sat there throughout this entire meeting waiting for your chance, and I nearly didn't give it to you. So I'm to apologise to that. So we have got Mazar's audit progress report, which I think is now, we've saved the best for last, Jim, I think. So over to you.
I accept your apologies, Chair. Thanks. This is just a very brief and hopefully straightforward progress report. As members will be aware, we still have 3 years of financial statements open that we haven't given our certificate on. And it's just a quick run through of each of those years. 1920, we still have our VFM arrangements work ongoing, and the work we do for that will also feed into 2021 and 2021-22. In terms of 2021 audit, it says here that the work had paused due to infrastructure national issues. As Jan alluded to before, that's now been resolved. SIPFA have issued us with a briefing note as to what they expect to see in the accounts. Our technical team are looking at that, and will come back to us with a list of tests we have to carry out. On the basis that we get that concluded, we will then give our opinion on the 2021 audit opinion. But as I pointed out before, the VFM side is still ongoing on that. In relation to 21-22, the work is getting there. I've added a bit of meat on the bones on the next page in terms of the work that is outstanding, and a little comment on each element of the work that is ongoing. All of the work is still subject to review, and on that we anticipate and hope to bring our 21-22 completion report to committee at the end of March 23 meeting. Other than that, Chair, we list a number of national publications that may be of interest and benefit to members, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Jim. That's very clear, very concise. Happy to take any questions from the floor on that one. No. Well, I'll take that. Everybody is very happy. Oh, Councillor Oliver, you have one. Just
a general sort of broad update on the VFM stuff and when you're anticipating being able to close that all down.
Thanks, Chair. There was quite a bit of work to be done, a few elements of which have been discussed this morning, so that's still ongoing. We endeavour to bring it as soon as we possibly can, hopefully March, but don't sort of quote me on that, but hopefully March. Cameron hasn't been with us this month. I need to speak to him when he returns in February.
Okay, thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Oliver? Okay, any more questions? Right, well, thank you for that, Jim. I'm sorry I nearly forgot you, but it was worth waiting for.
I'm not sure it was worth the wait, Chair.
Right, okay, thank you. Right, number 14, urgent business. We haven't been informed of any urgent business. 15, the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled for Wednesday, the 29th of March at the usual time of 10:15 a.m. So we now go into part 2. It is expected that matters included in this part of the agenda will be dealt with in private, and reports referred to are enclosed for members and officers only, coloured pink and marked not for publication. Exclusion of the press and public. I said the press have already left. So can I take it? Can we have a proposer and a seconder to do this, please, to go into the proposed by Councillor Towns and seconded by Councillor Oliver. Sorry.
I'm the same with interview panel.
Okay.
Exec Director, Councillor Dale is on one of the panels.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So we've taken it. We've closed the web